My name is Jack Henderson, and I live in Seattle where the rain keeps its own counsel. 9 years ago, I married Melissa in a small courthouse with fluorescent lights that made everyone look honest. She had 2 children from her first marriage, Oliver and Caitlin, 12 and 10 then, young enough to still believe that care was permanent, that adults kept their promises because that's what adults did. I remember thinking it would be enough to show up. I was wrong, but that truth came later, like fog rolling in after you've already started across the bridge. Their father, Troy, was a rumor with a pulse. He drifted through the calendar like weather. A sudden burst of sunlight and expensive sneakers, a laugh at the doorway, promises stacked like cups, then nothing. Days passed. Weeks. The shadow stretched and faded. I never tried to erase him. I'm not a fool. A man can be absent and still occupy a room. So I did what men do when they are building something that might not hold. I filled the quiet. I drove Oliver to soccer in shoes that squeaked on wet turf. I fixed Caitlin's chain when it snagged on her bike sprocket. I waited in the rain outside school concerts where my name was not on the program. I brought the forgotten lunches. I learned where the band kept extra reeds and which nurse would give you an extra ice pack if you asked kindly. Our home began to gather weight. The smell of garlic and onions after work, the thud of backpacks, the click of a lamp at 5 a.m. before anyone else was awake. We made small rituals. Friday night movies on the couch, Saturday pancakes, uneven and hopeful. The secret thumbs up I gave them when they scanned the bleachers to make sure I was there. I thought the rituals were mortar. I thought they would harden. On good nights the house sounded like water. Laughter moving from room to room, dishes rinsed, someone humming off-key. On bad nights it sounded like a museum. Careful steps, curated silence, everyone pretending history wasn't closing in. The first time Caitlin said a soft thanks was over something forgettable. A repaired backpack zipper, I think. She looked at me the way a kid looks at a crossing guard, relieved, not attached. Still, I carried that word in my pocket like a lucky coin. Oliver once tossed me the ball after practice and said, "You coming next week?" Like it was a real question and not a test. I told myself this was belonging. I told myself it would grow if I watered it with routine and quiet patience. Love, I believed then, was a plant that preferred the shade. We made it through the early years by pretending the world would always stay this size. Homework spread across the table. Jackets dripping by the door. The dog asleep on my boot. I taught Oliver to sand wood in straight lines. I taught Caitlin to check oil levels and listen for the honest sound of an engine. I taught them both that arriving early is a language even unreliable people understand. The lessons took, or seemed to. They grew. Their faces changed the way seasons change. Subtly, then all at once. The photo frames had to keep up. So did I. There were days I mistook function for family. The dishwasher ran. The yard got mowed. Report cards arrived. Troy appeared on holidays with long stories that bent toward heroism. I made room for the myth because I wanted there to be room for me. That is how you lose yourself. One compromise, then another until the shape of you fits whatever space is left. Melissa would squeeze my hand under the table when she was tired. A small promise that said, "We are in this together." I believed her. For a while we were. Seattle taught me patience the way rain teaches roofs to leak. Slow, persistent, unavoidable. I learned the grammar of their moods. I knew when Oliver's silence meant math trouble and when it meant a friend had defected. I knew when Caitlin's closed door meant music and when it meant tears. I learned to knock twice and ask only once. I paid for braces, for cleats that outgrew themselves, for a violin that sounded like apology until it didn't. I never itemized. I never kept score. I told myself that love, given quietly, kept its own ledger. There is a kind of night every stepfather learns to make peace with. The one where you sit in your car outside the house for an extra minute, engine idling, hands on the wheel, gathering yourself for the rooms ahead. Not dread. Something gentler and more dangerous. Hope. The belief that tonight will be the night they say the word "dad" by accident and no one will feel it like a betrayal. Some nights you get close. Most nights you do not. I remember a winter concert when the gym smelled like wet wool and floor polish. Caitlin stood in the third row, bow poised, her hair pulled back in a way that made her look older than the music. She searched the bleachers, found me, and her mouth moved around the shape of my name. Not Dad. Not yet. Just Jack. But she was looking for me to make the world steady. I waved. She nodded. The song started. You can build a religion out of small moments like that. I did. It sustained me longer than it should have. When people ask about those early years, I tell them the truth that makes sense. We were fine. We were a family moving forward. The truth that doesn't make sense is harder to say. We were building a bridge that looked complete from a distance, even as gaps opened between the planks. The water below didn't rush. It waited. Every promise I made was practical. I will be there. I will pay for this. I will pick you up. I will not make you choose between your father's stories and my presence. Practical promises are strong. They are also silent. They do not announce themselves the way grand gestures do. You only notice them when they vanish, and by then something else has already taken their place. Sometimes, late, after everyone was asleep, I would stand in the doorway of their rooms and listen for the soft certainty of a child's breathing. The dog would thump his tail against the doorframe as if to say, "This is what you guard." I believed him. I believed in effort as a kind of prayer. I believed in the arithmetic of consistency, that enough quiet deeds could equal one simple word, belong. The house learned my rhythms. Light on at 5. Coffee. Lunches packed. Truck warming. A note on the counter if I left before sunrise. Good luck today. Proud of you. See you after. No signature. They knew. Or I thought they did. Maybe the notes were a record for future me. A man who would need proof he tried. When Troy appeared, I stayed out of the way. I took a walk. I ran errands. I fixed a hinge that didn't need fixing. I told myself it was mercy. For him, for them, for me. He would leave, as he always did, and the house would sag back into shape around the absence. Melissa would be quiet that night. Her tired smile turned down at the edges, and I would hold the silence until it softened. "Thank you," she would say. The words shaped like a debt she didn't know how to repay. I told her there was nothing to repay. I told her we were even. Another lie that felt like kindness. There is a point at which routine becomes belief, then doctrine, then law. We reached it without noticing. The bedtime stories became test prep. The field trips became college tours. Glossy brochures with impossible lawns and young faces laughing at nothing. Melissa and I promised we would help, that we would make the first years lighter. I opened a separate account. I fed it with overtime and small denials. The trip we didn't take, the jacket I didn't buy, the truck I kept one more hard winter. Felt good to plan. Felt like proof. I didn't ask for gratitude. Gratitude is loud and temporary. I wanted something quieter. A home where my presence was not a question you had to answer. Some nights I thought we had it. Some mornings I knew we didn't. Still, I kept laying bricks because that's what a man does when he has chosen a foundation. He builds until he cannot. If you're waiting for the moment when the first crack appears, you will miss the dozens of smaller ones that teach it how. It wasn't a sentence. It wasn't an insult. It was a shift in temperature. A Saturday when Oliver didn't ask if I was coming to the game. A Sunday when Caitlin's thanks turned into a thumbs up without looking up. A weekday when Melissa's hand didn't find mine under the table. The house was the same. The weather inside it was not. Still, and this matters, I loved them. I loved the version of us that could have been. I loved the work even when the work refused to love me back. I believed in a thing that looked like family from every angle that counted except the one that finally did, recognition. If you had asked me then what I was afraid of, I would have said loss. But that wasn't it. The fear was smaller and meaner. That I would keep giving and one day discover the account was empty and no one had noticed the withdrawals. That love, left unattended, can expire like milk in the back of the fridge. Sour overnight, useless by morning, the carton still looking full until you open it. That's the truth of those early years, before the words got sharp and the lines were drawn. I lived as if devotion were durable. I lived as if care, given steadily and without demand, could not be misplaced. I lived as if love were a house you could keep upright by holding your breath. I did not know yet that some kinds of love do not end with thunder. They end like a radio losing signal. First a hiss, then a fade, then the sudden, clarifying quiet of a room you thought was full until the sound is gone. The slowest kind of betrayal is the one that never announces itself. Comes disguised as ordinary days, as laughter that doesn't reach the eyes. You tell yourself you're imagining it, that the air only feels colder because the seasons are changing. But deep down you know, the house is learning how to live without you. When the kids grew older, Melissa and I decided we'd help them with college. I opened a separate account, small at first, bonuses, overtime, a tax refund or two. It wasn't charity. It was preparation. The kind of love that plans ahead. I even labeled the account Future. I liked seeing that word beside their names. It made the years of small sacrifices look like strategy instead of self-erasure. For a while, that plan felt like hope with a password. But hope doesn't protect you from ghosts. Troy's side of the family reappeared one summer like a ripple across calm water. His sister, Julia, had moved up from California. Just wanted to reconnect, she said over dinner. Her voice was honey-thick with nostalgia. She talked about Troy like he was a hero trapped in bad luck. I smiled through it, cutting my steak into smaller and smaller pieces so my hands wouldn't shake. Julia started showing up more often, weekends, birthdays, drop-ins that lasted all afternoon. She took Caitlin shopping, sent Oliver videos of their real dad surfing somewhere warm, and filled their inboxes with stories. The time Troy rescued a dog, the night he slept under the stars, the poetry he used to write. In those stories, he was a myth. In mine, he was a line item under unpaid obligations. At first I ignored it. I told myself she was chasing her brother's memory, not rewriting mine. But I noticed the small shifts. Caitlin started talking about family roots. Oliver mentioned visiting California after graduation. Conversations that once included me now paused when I entered the room. Melissa called it nostalgia. I called it what it was, revision. I tried to keep the balance. I cooked more, asked fewer questions, stayed patient. I thought kindness could still outlast the erosion. But love built on silence decays quietly. It doesn't explode, it seeps. It turns the air thin until every breath costs extra effort. The first open fracture happened at dinner. Ordinary night, pasta steaming, the sound of forks scraping plates. Caitlin mentioned a memory from one of Julia's stories, something about Troy teaching her to ride a bike. I froze. I was the one who ran beside her that day, sprinting until my lungs burned, shouting encouragement until she let go and didn't notice I'd stopped running. I could still see her turning back, surprised that she was alone but still moving forward. I never forgot the look on her face. Triumph tangled with trust. Now, in her retelling, I didn't exist. Melissa laughed softly, like it was harmless. Oliver added, "Aunt Julia says Dad always wanted to take us camping there." His tone was casual, but it landed like a verdict. Dad. Not Troy. Not the man who vanished. Just Dad. A title I had paid for but never truly owned. I didn't correct them. I just chewed, swallowed, waited for the taste to fade. The room filled with small sounds. The faucet dripping, Caitlin's phone buzzing, Melissa's quiet sigh. The kind of noise that builds walls instead of bridges. Later that night, Melissa found me in the kitchen, the light from the refrigerator painting everything blue. "They're just reconnecting," she said gently. "You know how memory works." "Do I?" I asked. "Because mine still hurts in real time." She touched my arm. "Please don't make this about you." That sentence landed harder than she meant. I almost laughed. The man who paid for everything was being told not to take it personally. Over the next few months, the distance turned structural. Oliver stopped asking for rides. Caitlin stopped saying goodnight. Their rooms felt like rented spaces. The door frames kept their secrets. I started hearing laughter behind closed doors. Laughter that stopped when I passed by. Not cruelty exactly, just the sound of life moving on without needing my approval. I told myself it was normal. Teenagers grow apart. Parents fade to background noise. But the silence wasn't the silence of growth. It was the silence of replacement. One night, while balancing the budget, I saw the savings account total climb past 80,000. The numbers looked sterile, unfeeling. Every dollar was a scar from some overtime shift. Every line item a piece of myself traded for stability. I closed the laptop and sat there in the dim light, listening to the hum of the fridge. The house felt alive, but not friendly, like it was holding its breath, waiting for me to understand. Caitlin started calling Julia Aunt J. They texted constantly. New shoes, new stories, new phrases like, Dad's dream for us. I asked Melissa once if she thought it was strange how easily the past had rewritten itself. She said, maybe they just need to fill in the blanks. Blanks. That's what I had become. A space left open so history could edit me out. Then came the dinner. The one that stripped the rest of the illusions clean. It was a Thursday, gray outside, the kind of Seattle evening when the rain sounds like static. Oliver had just received a letter from a college, some small campus on the coast. Everyone was in good spirits. Melissa poured wine, Caitlin lit candles. For a moment, the table looked like peace. We toasted, laughed. Then Caitlin said, almost playfully, Dad would be proud. She meant Troy. Of course she did. Oliver nodded. Yeah, he always said we'd make it further than he did. I smiled, though something inside me went cold. He did say that, huh? Caitlin nodded eagerly. Aunt Jay told us. He used to talk about it all the time. Melissa looked at me then, a flicker of apology hiding behind her glass. I waited for her to say something, to correct, to balance, to remind them of the man sitting 3 feet away who'd paid for every textbook and dentist visit. But she didn't. She just let the silence bloom. Oliver turned to me. Jack, did you ever meet him? It was an honest question, not a cruel one. That made it worse. No, I said quietly. Not really. We didn't move in the same circles. Caitlin smiled softly. That's a shame. You would have liked him. There it was. The verdict delivered with innocence. You would have liked him. Past tense. As if I were an outsider commenting on a family story I'd wandered into by mistake. I nodded. Maybe I would have. The rest of dinner unfolded like a eulogy for someone I hadn't realized was dead, me. They spoke of Troy as if he were some great unfinished song. I just kept chewing, counting the seconds between breaths. Afterward, Melissa tried to bridge the gap. They didn't mean it like that, she said while we washed dishes. They're just remembering. I was there, I said. Every single day they're remembering wrong. She didn't answer, just ran the water louder. That night, in bed, I stared at the ceiling and listened to the rain tapping against the window. Each drop sounded like a truth I'd been avoiding. I was no longer needed. Maybe I never had been, just convenient. A placeholder for stability until nostalgia became currency again. When I closed my eyes, I saw the family photo on the mantel. My hand on Oliver's shoulder, Caitlin leaning against Melissa, all of us smiling like we believed in something permanent. The picture had started to feel dishonest. It captured a version of love that existed only because no one had tested it yet. That's how the cracks began. Not loud, not visible. Just small shifts in gravity. A look that lasted too long. A word that carried a hidden weight. A silence that decided to stay. And I, the man who thought love was a steady job, kept showing up even as the hours stopped counting. Because that's what I'd always done. Work quietly, pay faithfully, and believe that effort could still be mistaken for belonging. That night, the rain didn't stop. It pressed against the windows like it wanted in. I sat at the kitchen table long after everyone had gone to bed. The house reduced to hums and sighs. The refrigerator, the old pipes, the faint echo of water in the gutters. In front of me glowed the laptop screen, its light cold and steady, showing the balance of the account I'd built for them. $90,000. A number with no emotion, no gratitude, no trace of the years I had traded for it. Each dollar was a sentence in a story no one would ever read. Weekends spent working overtime, skipped vacations, shirts worn past their expiration date. Every sacrifice had a reason, and every reason had a name. Oliver, Caitlin, family. I stared at the numbers until they stopped meaning money and started meaning me. The decision came not from anger, but from clarity, the kind that arrives only when disappointment has burned through every layer of confusion and leaves behind something clean. I realized I could not keep financing a version of love that no longer existed. Love that required deposits to stay alive is not love. It's a subscription, and I was overdue to cancel. By morning, I had moved the money. A few clicks, a few confirmations, and the account that once symbolized promise was now just another reminder of ownership. My ownership. I transferred the funds to my personal savings, renamed the folder Reclaim Time. Then I shut the laptop and poured myself coffee. The sound of the machine gurgling felt like applause from the quiet parts of myself that had been waiting years for this moment. I didn't make a speech. I didn't leave a note. The world rarely grants dignity to the men who leave quietly, but that's the only kind of leaving I know how to do. I just went to work like any other day. The rain had lightened by then, but the clouds still hung low, the color of old pewter. I remember thinking, this is what freedom feels like, not joy, just the absence of begging. The first signs of the fallout came quickly. By the next week, college offices began calling. Forms needed signatures. Tuition portals blinked red. Melissa's voice, once calm, began to tremble with the effort of pretending everything was still under control. "They'll figure it out," I said. She nodded, but her eyes told me she already knew they wouldn't. Oliver called from campus, his tone half confused, half accusing. "The payment didn't go through. Did you forget to transfer?" "No," I said. I stopped. There was silence on the line, the kind that rearranges everything that comes after. "What do you mean you stopped?" "I mean I'm done paying for something that doesn't see me." He laughed then, short and uncertain. "You can't just do that." "I already did." Caitlin called 2 days later. She was crying. "The housing office says the deposit's missing. They won't hold my room." "I'm sorry to hear that," I said softly. "Maybe your father's family can help." "Uncle Julia doesn't—" She stopped herself, corrected. "Aunt Julia doesn't have that kind of money." "Then it's time she learns what her stories cost." She hung up. The next time I saw her name on the phone, I didn't answer. Some silences are the only boundaries left. Melissa, to her credit, tried to fix it. She called financial aid, called relatives, called the bank. She thought maybe if she worked hard enough, she could reverse what I had done. But money isn't the point. It never was. It's just the measure of how much you've been taken for granted. One evening she cornered me in the living room. The lamp behind her flickered, making the shadows on her face look older than she was. "You can't do this to them," she said. "I didn't do this to them," I replied. "I just stopped doing everything for them. They're kids. They're adults who wanted independence. I'm giving it to them. You're punishing them for loving their father." "No," I said. "I'm freeing them to live with that love." Her breath caught. "You sound cruel." "Maybe, but cruelty is just clarity that no one asked for." She turned away, whispering, "You'll regret this." But regret requires doubt, and mine had already died. In the weeks that followed, the house became a theater of unraveling. Oliver called less. Caitlin came home only to collect things she'd left behind. Melissa moved through rooms like a guest. The silence between us wasn't peace. It was paperwork waiting to be finalized. Troy's legend began to crack. Julia stopped visiting. Promises turned into apologies. The man who'd been painted as a hero remained what he'd always been, a ghost with good PR. I watched from a distance as their illusions lost funding. Bills piled up. Caitlin's car insurance lapsed. Oliver's dorm fees turned into late notices. The aunt who had promised to honor her brother's memory stopped answering calls. Reality, like gravity, doesn't care who it pulls down. One night, Melissa sat beside me on the couch, eyes red, voice quiet. "They're struggling," she said. "I know. They didn't deserve this. Neither did I." She didn't argue. She just cried, small and silent, the way people cry when the fight is gone but pride won't let them admit it. Days passed. The house settled into a new rhythm. Absence, mostly. The sound of my own footsteps replaced theirs. The air grew stiller, lighter. Freedom always smells faintly like loneliness, but I found I could breathe again. Then, unexpectedly, Oliver showed up. It was early morning, fog on the street, the world half asleep. He stood at the door, hair uncombed, eyes hollowed by something I recognized. Consequence. He didn't ask to come in, he just did. "I got a job," he said. "Paramedic training. Nights mostly." I nodded. "Good." He looked around the house like it was smaller than he remembered. "Mom says you're still mad." "I'm not mad," I said. "I'm finished." He swallowed, nodded once, then set an envelope on the table. "For you." After he left, I opened it. Inside was a photograph, him in uniform, standing beside an ambulance, the name tag glinting. Oliver Henderson. Not by blood, but by choice, or maybe by habit. Either way, it was enough. I placed the photo in the same folder where the college account once lived. It didn't feel like victory. Felt like balance finally restored. That evening, I poured a drink and watched the light fade across the street. The house was quiet again, but this time it didn't ache. I thought about all the years I'd spent trying to earn what should have been offered freely. Love, respect, belonging, they aren't wages. They're invitations. And sometimes the only way to be seen is to leave the room where you were invisible. Outside, the rain began again, steady and unhurried. For once, I didn't mind. It sounded like closure. It sounded like the truth finally learning how to breathe. A year has passed since the night I chose silence over service. Seattle has moved through 4 seasons of rain, and so have I. The house feels different now, emptier, yes, but also honest. Every sound belongs to the people who remain. Melissa still lives here, though what ties us together now is not love the way it used to be. It's a worn sort of peace, like 2 survivors sharing a raft after the ship has gone down. We don't talk much about the past. We talk about groceries, electricity, the dog's vet appointment. Neutral subjects, harmless weather. Some nights we eat dinner at the same table, but the conversation floats on the surface, careful not to touch the deep water beneath. I used to mistake that restraint for distance. Now I think it's mercy. Some wounds close only if you stop touching them. I've learned the shape of quiet mornings again. The kettle's whistle, the faint scent of damp cedar outside. I drive to work before the city wakes, come home after it's already half asleep. No more overtime, no more second shifts chasing a future that was never mine. My paychecks feel smaller, but my life doesn't. You'd be surprised how much space appears when you stop paying rent on resentment. Melissa still hears from the kids. She doesn't tell me everything, and I don't ask. Boundaries are our new form of affection. I know Caitlin moved back to Seattle last month. Her postcards arrive addressed to Jack H. Formal, cautious. Oliver sends the occasional text, brief as a pulse. Hope you're well. Nothing else. I answer with the same brevity. Love in its postscript form. Sometimes I catch Melissa looking at me the way one looks at an old photograph. Grateful it exists, sad it can't be retaken. There are evenings when we sit on opposite ends of the couch, watching the same show, and I can feel both of us measuring the silence. Hers full of apology, mine full of release. We're not enemies. We're 2 people who built something sturdy enough to collapse slowly. The neighborhood hasn't changed much. The maple in the front yard still drops its leaves like burnt paper every October. The neighbors still wave. They don't know the history behind our tidy lawn, or the cost of keeping it that way. They see a house. They don't see the battlefield beneath the paint. Sometimes, when I'm raking, I imagine Troy somewhere in California, older, maybe grayer, telling new stories that contradict the old ones. I don't hate him. I don't think about him much at all. That might be the truest sign of healing, not forgiveness, just indifference. Hatred keeps you tethered. Indifference cuts the rope. I see Oliver once in a while. The first time was by accident. Grocery store, late evening, fluorescent light humming. He looked different. Shoulders squared, uniform crisp, exhaustion honest. We shook hands like men meeting halfway across years. He didn't apologize. I didn't ask him to. He just said, "Work's tough." And I said, "Good." That was it. A whole reconciliation condensed into a single syllable. A week later, he left an envelope in the mailbox. Inside was a photograph. Him standing beside an ambulance, the patch on his sleeve catching sunlight. Oliver Henderson, paramedic. No note, no signature. He didn't need to explain. The photo itself was the sentence he couldn't say. I understand now. I placed it inside the same folder where I once kept their college savings plan, the one I emptied to save myself. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it because symbols matter. That folder used to hold proof of obligation. Now it holds proof of outcome. Both cost the same, only one feels earned. Caitlin wrote once. A letter, handwritten in the looping script she used for thank you notes when she was little. She said she was teaching now middle school English. She said she tells her students that love is work, but it isn't ownership. At the bottom she wrote, I think I understand what you meant about effort. No apology, just recognition. Sometimes that's enough. Melissa read the letter, folded it carefully, and said nothing. Later, as she was turning off the lights, she whispered, They're better people because of you. I didn't answer. Some truths lose their shape when you agree out loud. These days I live smaller but clearer. I read more. I take long walks through Volunteer Park, watch strangers feed ducks, count how many faces still carry kindness untested. I've learned that solitude isn't punishment. It's maintenance. Every man who's given too much needs a season where he gives nothing at all. Occasionally, a memory sneaks through the cracks. The sound of Caitlin's violin warming up, Oliver's sneakers thudding down the stairs, Melissa laughing before everything complicated. The memories don't sting the way they used to. They feel like photographs left too long in the sun. Faded but still warm. One evening, late summer sliding into fall, I sat on the porch with a cup of coffee and watched the streetlights blink on. The air smelled like rain waiting for permission. A car slowed in front of the house, then drove off. For a second, I thought it might be one of them. Then I realized it didn't matter. Whether they came back or not, I had already given them what I could. The lesson that stability isn't free, and that love without gratitude eventually bills itself. Inside, the clock ticked with the patience of someone who has seen everything before. Melissa called from the kitchen, asking if I wanted tea. I said yes. That single word carried more truth than any argument we'd ever had. It meant I could still accept small kindnesses without turning them into debts. When people ask what happened, those who only saw the surface, I tell them the simplest version: we grew honest. They nod, thinking it means peaceful. It doesn't. Honesty is never peaceful. It's just cleaner. Sometimes, when sleep won't come, I ask myself the same question that's haunted me since the beginning. Was I wrong to step back? To stop paying for a love that no longer saw me? The answer changes with the hour. Some nights I think yes, because real love should endure even when it hurts. Other nights I think no, because endurance without respect is just another name for surrender. Most nights, I let the question hang in the dark, unanswered. Maybe that's the point. Some debts are meant to remain outstanding. In the end, this is what remains. A man, a house, a quiet kind of freedom. The rain still comes, soft against the glass, and I still listen. Every drop sounds like memory learning how to fall without breaking. Every morning, I wake, make coffee, open the window, and breathe in the city I once thought would drown me. It doesn't anymore. Sometimes the most meaningful lessons are taught in silence. Sometimes love must withdraw to be remembered. And sometimes the strongest act of care is the quiet refusal to keep giving to those who mistook your devotion for convenience.